What if one could suffer less in the integration of their meteor when it comes to the design of your legacy? I'd like to welcome Jay Hughes Jr. to the Design Your Legacy podcast this lovely morning. Welcome, Jay.
Thank you, Angelina. I am delighted to be joining you this morning.
It's my pleasure to host you, and I believe you're joining from the Colorado area in the United States of America.
I'm sitting on 8,000 feet on a mountain in Aspen, Colorado.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so let's jump in to some of what we chatted about in our icebreaker conversation when it comes to inheritance, being a meteor. Before we jump in, would you just like to share a brief icebreaker with the listening audience regarding your background or anything you would like to share just to let them know you a little bit before we dive deep?
Well, I've been wandering this planet for 57 years as an attorney, and then the law left me in an interesting way in 2000, and I became essentially a counselor to families around the world that are interested in the question of how to avoid the shirt sleeve proverb and how to flourish, and in turn be members of a flourishing society. I'm the sixth generation lawyer in my family. There's a little question about the second, but we certainly the first. My father did this work before the Second World War and helped European families provide the means in America to get them through the war. I have worked all over the world, as I said, with families who share the common interest in how can their families flourish, how can they avoid the shirt sleeve proverb of three generations and out? How can they be five generations and longer? Um, I would say, Angelina, that my interests, as I've come to understand them, have really been far more in social anthropology, social psychology, evolutionary psychology than in the law. Um, Equally, and I'll leave it at this, my father said to me many, many years ago that the purpose of the law, along with medicine, the mental and physical well-being of a family, spiritually, the ministry, high academia, what it means to be human, the fourth of the noble professions, the law's purpose, is to help create safe, orderly societies for human beings to wake up in. That gift from him has been what I have followed in my professional practice ever since.
Thank you. Thank you for that icebreaker. Thank you. Before we jump into the first question regarding how wealth is more than money, I wanted to talk the numbers. And you brought this up also in our preamble that about $110 trillion will be moved twice. Say more if you would.
If we go back to the end of World War II and the Marshall Plan, um, which was the greatest act of benevolence by a state that won a war that had ever occurred in history. We combined that act of benevolence, which enabled Germany and Japan to become partners of America and rejoin the global community. Since then, through the remarkable growth of the industrial economy around the world, the growth of green food and food revolution, the evolution in medicine, we have accumulated an enormous abundance. I am not without awareness of poverty. However, to answer your question, we have accumulated in the world an enormous abundance, numbers that are staggering, and I'll just use 100 and 110 trillion as the guesstimate of the amount of abundance that will move into two sets of hands over the next 50 years all over the world. That's not an Eastern or Western phenomenon, it's a global phenomenon. Um, Essentially said, the world is going to have an experience of abundance as it moves around the planet that is unique in, I believe, in human history because we have basically been conditioned to scarcity. And scarcity was the nature of human experience through the 300,000 years of our species. Now we find ourselves a little way into the 21st century with a problem of abundance and then the integration of that abundance into the hands of people who have no preparation for it.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things you also mentioned is countries such as China, South Korea, et cetera, have no modern inheritance model regarding the preparation. And I'm going to agitate the problem a little bit more before we jump into the remedy, is that there are many financial intermediaries out there, but more people ought to be willing to talk about the wealth of well-being or wealth as well-being. And yet that subject needs to be able to be explored openly without triggers of entitlement or triggers of, you had just mentioned a moment ago, scarcity in terms of knowing we can all perhaps have peace in one's family, no matter if that family is first gen, second gen, 10th generation and on, in terms of how we all play nice together, especially if 70% of that inheritance will find the way into the hands of women who are not receiving enough support or guidance and may be afraid to even ask their advisor or financial planner their true questions for fear of looking bad or looking dumb, etc.
Yes, that's exactly right. And if we look at the demography of the world into which this enormous abundance is flowing, it will be a 1.2 world. Yes, I want to say it again, a 1.2 world. The all of the world, developing and now the developed and developing world, are moving to a demography of 1.2 children per mother. By the way, all those mothers are alive to have those children, so these are real numbers. Um, and let me just say, Angelina, since the women question is present, there is some very good statistics that about 70% of these enormous wealth movements of financial capital, not wealth, will be into the hands of women. That makes sense in a 1.2 world and a world in which women live longer than men. You can do all the math and come to that conclusion. Um, it also means, in an odd way, and I don't know how far you want to go with this, but it also means, in an odd way, that most people on the world will have no brothers and sisters, and they will have no first cousins. I'll let everybody do the math to
Sure.
help them. To help them, that's a
Yeah,
1.2 world.
yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I know that there are topics that are very important for us to cover today, so let's jump in to the definition of true wealth. Let's start here. How should families orient or reorient themselves around that idea, and what is your definition of wealth?
Yeah. I would say that no matter what we say from here in this remarkable opportunity to share our journeys, that this is the most important thing I'm going to ask people to do consciously. I'm going to ask them to reprogram their brains. This is difficult. To understand that the word wealth throughout all of history, it's an English Anglo-Saxon word, came into our lexicon in around 450 AD through two words in Anglo-Saxon, W-E-O-L, wealth. You can hear wealth. Every dictionary until 30 or 40 years ago, the first definition of wealth was well-being. That is the definition of wealth through all of human history in the use of this word in English. I have found, interestingly, Angelina, that when you translate this word into other languages, it has the same meaning. It does not mean financial capital. It means human well-being. The key to everything we're going to talk about today is that a family's concentration is on well-being as its wealth
Mhm.
and financial capital as a support to the process of growing its well-being. This consciousness must be present for a family to have a chance.
Yeah, absolutely. One of your prior podcasts talked about in the line item, whether it's a profit or loss statement, a balance sheet, that there needs to be a line for well-being if that
Yes.
family will truly succeed. And yet, if that gets forgotten about, left behind, I think the distinction you made, and this might even be from your book, that a lot of the times what makes a family amazing is that long-term vision. It's not necessarily the 10-year or the 20-year plan, it's the 100 plus year plan, and making decisions not just financially and we're not going to bring up cryptocurrency or any type of specific method, but it's looking at if this decision is great for the 100-year plan, not just the 10 or 20-year plan, but also when it comes to well-being, to not skip that in the investment one is willing to make into the social capital or the intellectual or the emotional capital, and the preservation of this, especially with families that understand roots and heritage, etc. Old money and the new money coming into this that might not know the formula, but that they're welcome to learn it. That it's not just racing to the front so fast, but realizing that the preservation of well-being, the preservation of wealth, is something that takes incredible hard work, focus, and discipline.
Well, let's see if we can pull that apart a little bit. So if wealth is well-being, and that's at the top of your page, when you're creating your family balance sheet, um, let's look first at what the family balance sheet consists of. And I'm going to make a hand gesture. Some of the people who are listening can't see this, but I have my right hand up. My fingers are pointing out and horizontally, and my thumb is pointing down vertically. Now I'm going to turn it upside down for our readers, and my thumb is sticking up and my other fingers are closing. If your thumb is sticking up and your other fingers are closing, your thumb is financial capital, and you notice your other fingers are closed. This is death for a family. If it sees itself as its financial capital, it's done. The journey's over. Now, if you turn your thumb upside down again, it's sticking down vertically, and the four other fingers are sticking out horizontally. The top finger is spiritual capital, the ring finger is social capital, the middle finger is intellectual capital, and the first finger is human capital. These four qualitative capitals are the critical ones for a family's well-being. Do you have a purpose that you believe in together? That's spiritual capital, and that you will work together to create. Do you make great joint decisions? That's social capital. You learn to do that. Intellectual, are you a learning system that's learning constantly and sharing what you learn? Human capital, are you thriving human beings supported by the financial capital with roots in the ground to grow these four? All the families that are successful learn that. They learn that wealth is well-being is growing its qualitative self with its quantitative self supporting. I repeat again, if your thumb is sticking up and your other fingers disappear, financial capital is how you see yourselves. That's death for a family. There's no vitality in it. Quantitative capital cannot make up for the qualitative capital you don't grow. It can't. You got to grow your qualitative capital, supported by your quantitative capital, and then you have a chance. Now, you also said something about length of vision. How far do you look out? Well, we probably get in a minute to the shirt sleeve proverb that is universal culturally. Every culture on earth has had that observation. But what we might then look at is to say, well, then the first measurement of how well we did is halfway through the third generation's life, because that's the first time we can say how we did if we
Mm.
want to avoid the proverb, which is universal culturally. That's about 100 years for the third generation to be born, get enough in its development to be able to see how it's doing. So families that make the decision to go on this journey of wealth as well-being, the development of their qualitative selves, are making a decision that they hope that the third generation, their grandchildren, will have be healthy, thriving human beings in concert with each other, making decisions together with a common vision to enhance each other's lives toward there being a thriving fourth and fifth generation. That's the proposition.
I think it's a wonderful proposition. And I think that the line item on the balance sheet has to do with the three words of, let me find it real quick, if the family members are happy, thriving, and productive.
Yes.
And I think you mentioned in our preamble that there's thousands of firms out there and thousands of advisors that end up being financial intermediaries.
Yep.
And that line item of are all family members happy, thriving, and productive in the harmonious relationships between all family members, the leaders, the followers, and so forth, is that even looked at, let
No,
alone?
no. In fact, those firms, perfectly reasonable in a capitalist society, are looking at assets under management. The great firms that actually help families do what we're talking about, as well as the great families themselves, look at the metric of souls under management, SOULS under management, and not as a slave management system, but an open architecture system for human thriving. They're looking at a whole different metric, aren't they?
Well,
So
absolutely.
I would, yes, no, I would just say to people, when you're looking for an advisor, ask yourself and ask the advisor, are they basically an asset under management firm, which is fine, which is intermediating financial capital, or are they a souls under management firm interested in the human thriving of their clients over a long period of time? It's a very open-ended question.
And one that cuts straight to down to the soul and the spirit.
I think it does, and you'll get some very interesting answers. A lot, you may get some answers from the asset under management firms that suggest they're interested in your qualitative selves, then ask more questions.
Yeah, I thought one of the points that you brought up about the family compact was very valuable regarding the sharing of stories as a way to bond family members together and to bring up the stories and to bring up the stories and to not let them get lost. It's interesting, on my father's side of the family, he is a 12th generation American, originally from England. My mother's side of the family, they're originally from South Korea and they never wrote anything down. So the
Hmm.
stories got lost
Hmm.
unless my mother can remember them. During COVID, I interviewed each of them for about 10 or 11 hours, but an hour a day, not all in one sitting. And all of this information came up. And I've mentioned it before on previous podcasts that I would have been a nicer teenager if I had known the stories, but I didn't.
Well, let me say, Angelina, to the question of storytelling, two things uh, to build on the wealth as well-being. Social anthropology, um, social psychology, evolutionary psychology make it very clear that if a family is not growing elders, a community is not growing elders, it will fail. One of the great problems in modernity is we have lost touch with that reality. It's absolutely inviolate. You can't change it. This is how human communities thrive. They grow elders. That is, they in each generation they grow some people out of their fabric who eventually, not by age, but by inclination, are interested in all the boats rising, not just their own boat. Now, they may be selfish in a good way. They want their boat to rise too. But they're basically interested in all the boats rising, and we can't get enough of those people. So we have to grow them. And we grow them through the stories of how we had them in the past. That's the greatest stories are about how you grow an elder who, like the Iroquois elder, at the beginning of a meeting, which the Iroquois do today, that's a tribe in America up on the border of New York State and Canada. When the elder gets up at the beginning of their family meetings, their tribal meetings, they're a 600-year-old family with a Genesis story, Hiawatha. He or she, the elder, says, let us hope that today the care and diligence and wisdom we will bring to our decision making will honor those 7 generations ago who made it possible for us to be here today, so that those 7 generations from today will honor what we're doing. Oh, that's wealth as well-being as a tribe. Now, let me say one other thing about the storytelling and the question of elders. We develop stories that basically tell us about how we deal with with transition. Families don't have succession, by the way. Dynasties have succession. Families have transition. Constant transition is the different stages of life as the family members progress. Constant transitions of whole cohorts, 1 generation, 2, 3 generations. The great stories of families are about how they faced a particular transition and how they solved it. Those are the stories we're desperate to hear. And we must have those stories. And if they're not our stories, then we must choose from another family a story that teaches us. But that question of the great stories teaching us how, in transition of the generations or the individuals, we overcame the obstacles is the really great question of all families, isn't it? And that's what the elders want to tell us about.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to bring up something that is in your one of your books before we move on to the next question, because it relates to what you just shared. And sometimes we might not realize that we're working with or against the laws of physics, but I thought that
Mm,
this was a very interesting metaphor because physics is real. And one of the things you brought up in terms of first generation, second generation, third generation, and onwards, it's not just that the first generation worked hard and they're self-made and the second generation was college educated and they could attain society status or high society status, and then the third generation grows up in luxury, but it's more so that the energy creates a new form. Stage one. Stage two, there's that period of stasis or stability and maintenance. And then the stage three, and I think this is what you're referring to regarding the importance of these stories that get shared often and passed down, is the dematerialization of the energy or the entropy. And that's what I think a lot of people aren't ready for, because it's like, whoa, where is this coming from?
mm. Angelina, you put your finger on the critical question of how to understand our bits of energy and our family's bits of energy in the universe in which we live. This is not metaphysics, by the way, people. This is basic physics. So here's the first thing that's so unusual about the families that we're helping. A person takes energy and turns it into matter. Let me just say that again. A person takes energy and turns it into matter. Let me just say to our audience that that may feel normal to them because they're living in a family where that's happened. But let me tell you, that is the most abnormal thing possible in this universe. That's why there's only 5% of matter in the 100% of the energy body of our universe. Matter is very unusual. Now, family's not unusual, and there's a Genesis act between two people who create a family. They're also taking their energies and merging them and creating it matter in this thing we call family. Let's come back for a moment, though, to that person who takes energy and turns it into matter. We'll call it financial capital for the moment. But of course, with that creation, if family is born, that's two or more people, there's also the creation of this matter, of this thing called family, two pieces of matter. Now, what are the rule in this universe? You use the word entropy. Let's be very, very clear that in this universe, something, the second law of thermodynamics, please, anybody in the audience who didn't take physics, don't worry about what I said, but let me say that a universal, that is, no one doubts it, law of this universe, excuse me, is energy becomes matter, and as soon as it becomes matter in this universe, it is trying to get back to energy. Let's be very clear. That's how our universe works. Energy to matter, and as soon as it's matter, the matter wants to get back to energy. This is the law of entropy. This is the law of the second law of, and how does this apply to families? Well, exactly, Angelina, what you said. What have human beings, social anthropology, observed in every country? No, excuse me, culture. Every culture that we can study has the same proverb describing energy to matter, matter to energy. The way it comes down in the three generation proverb, again, this is universal culturally, different clothing, different ways of expressing, it's always present. That's how human beings have observed each other through thousands of years. That's where proverbs come from. What was it talking about? The first generation takes energy and makes it matter. The second generation, that matter begins to plateau. It's not dynamically regenerated. We can talk about that later. It rather is plateauing. You feel that the energy slowing down. The third generation consumes that matter. And guess what? The family's gone back into the energy body. Now, let me just say what I just said is physics. It's social anthropology. That's how it works. It just sounds very nice the way I describe it as a policy, but the disintegration is very, very unpleasant,
It's painful.
incredibly painful.
Yeah,
It's
not
not
just
thriving I'm sorry, it's not thriving human beings. It's not a learning system, intellectual capital, growing a learning system. It's not making hundreds of decisions together over that 100 years. And it's not spiritual capital, a vision of future human beings thriving. It's the antithesis of that. It's the opposite of that. It is the financial capital is all you own.
and nature can be very unforgiving.
Well, Mother Nature, now let's talk about Mother Nature for a moment, because this is really important. Mother Nature's rules of physics, energy to matter to energy, are immutable, inviolable, great big words that mean nobody has disagrees with them. But here's where Mother Nature gets really interesting, Angelina, and this is at the depth of my philosophy of practice. So my philosophy is wealth is well-being. Can it be continued over a long period of time? What I will call dynamic regeneration. But here's the great question that almost nobody knows except the families that reach their fourth and fifth generation. Mother Nature says that your family, all of our listeners' families, will eventually go back to entropy. That's un, don't start the journey if you're not willing to play by the very, very big rules of physics. Your family will eventually cease to be matter and go back to energy. However, Angelina, here is the great truth. Every family has free will as to when. Let me say it again. Every family that begins this journey has free will as to when the family goes back to energy. So, yes, you family will go back to energy, but each of you listening has free will as to when. And I will say again, for the third time on purpose, if you begin your family balance sheet with wealth as well being on top, and you're growing your qualitative capitals, spiritual, social, intellectual, and human, supported by your financial, you have figured out how to exercise free will.
Well, it's wise planning, but
Yes.
yeah, and I
Yes.
think many times this needs to be passed on in families because private and public schools forget to cover this. And if the financial planners are forgetting to cover this, that's why this conversation is so important.
I would say that the planning process, which sadly, and I'm an old man, so I speak very frankly, the planning process basically deals with the first generation's interest in avoiding taxes and avoiding creditors of it that profligate children create for their money. It doesn't deal with life enhancement.
Hmm.
The planning process of any humane system must be looking at the question of the third generation and asking, is the plan I'm writing going to enhance their lives? Not subsidize their lives, enhance their lives. What a chasm of difference between subsidy, which is a disaster, and enhancement, which is a possibility.
Yeah, I liked, and again, I know I have to go on to the next question, but I liked two of the questions that you raised regarding trust and dentures. There's two questions that you wrote in because if it's not for the enhancement of the life of the beneficiaries, then is it creating trustafariance? Is it creating an addiction to trust distributions? And and yet it creates a whole new mindset for the trustees regarding how it is they show up and what mental capacity regarding their attitude do they show up to deliver and be present and to carry out the execution of their duties. I mean,
No,
it really is a beautiful intention. Do you remember those two questions? I have them written down. I can find them.
of course. Well, look, if you want a remittance addicted person so that you go out of business, write a trust that has to do with saving taxes and avoiding creditors. You'll succeed. And the proverb wins. No free will there. Your trusts will not be contributing to wealth well-being. No, they will be contributing to stasis. They'll be contributing to a system that creates people who are remittance addicted, or at least the high risk of it. Now, one of my partners in a law firm in America that I am very attached to, when they founded their firm in 1999, Angelina, they made a promise to each other and then to their clients. Every trust they write begins at the top of the page with these two sentences. This trust is a gift of love. This trust exists to enhance the lives of its beneficiaries. That's a trust someone can live in because they can figure out when their meteor comes, that trust is a meteor up in outer space. We'll discuss that soon. They can say, well, what is my job as beneficiary? My job as beneficiary is to ask the trustee to live in my trust as a gift of love and to ask my trustee and hold him, her, or it accountable for whether the trust enhanced my life. I know now how to live in that trust. And if that trust is doing that, it's expressing love and it's enhancing my life, not subsidizing my life, enhancing my life, I would say I'm probably adding to the energy body of the family in my generation. So guess what? I'm exercising free will as to when.
And I think to win for everyone is the key compared to the fear of I don't want to lose this or I don't want them to lose this. It just shifts the energy to that of expanding.
Well, let's put it this way. If every system you create is not created with the possibility that it will add incrementally to the energy of that family's long journey, then what? It must be flat or negative. Flat or negative takes you out of business. It has to be incrementally adding energy, right? Everything you do, every decision you make, every structure you create has to add, because otherwise, Mother Nature's rules are you go out of business.
Yeah. So you've worked with multi-generational families of immense wealth. What distinguishes the families that thrive? Are there particular real world behaviors that you could add or particular mindsets that make them amazing stewards? Because sometimes people don't know.
Well, in a book I wrote called Family Wealth, Keeping It in the Family, the first book I wrote in this field, I took an opportunity to write about the Rockefeller story. And so I'm going to tell it in my way. They wouldn't tell it quite the same way, but it's how I interpret the story. Now, let's all remember that John D. Rockefeller Sr. was born in the 1840s and that there are now Rockefellers in 2025 in the fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh generation doing quite well. Huh. That's like the Iroquois story, isn't it? I wonder what the secret was. Well, here was the secret. Here is, I believe, the secret of their success. John D. Rockefeller Sr. had four daughters and a son, I think. The son was a junior. Junior is difficult. I'm a junior. It's hard to live in your under the shadow of your senior, particularly if he's a big shadow. Um, so in a series of conversations, but in my book, I made it one conversation. John D. Rockefeller Jr. and his father were talking in the special den he'd built for his father in a home he built, that Junior built for his parents, that you can go and visit up on the Hudson River. It's quite a beautiful home. Not a huge home, by the way, a home you could live in. It's interesting. It's not a mansion, it's a home to live in. So, what were they talking about in that conversation? Well, the father and the son were discussing this. The son came to his father and he said, Father, I want to leave the family business, in which he was on all the boards because his father had retired at 50. Most people didn't know that. And the father said, Really? What do you want to do? By the way, the father didn't say you have no choice. Already it's an interesting story, isn't it? Ah. And the son said, Dad, what I want to do is I want to grow a great family and do philanthropy. Now comes the secret of the Rockefeller story. One son, 1900, think about what consciousness was. Did the old man say you have no choice? Of course, you have to stay on all the boards and do that. He didn't. He said, well, then you must go and do what you want to do, just like I did. And then he said something incredibly generative. I'm not doing well with my philanthropy. Would you help me? Look at the elements of that story. Not you're the only son, you have to stay in the business. You can't do what you want to do. You're not going to be able to build a great family because you're going to be spending the time running businesses. And you won't get to your philanthropy because you have to worry about all the money that we're accumulating in our financial capital business. Of course. Liberation, freedom, conscious liberation and freedom of a human being to thrive. Now, if people want to study that just for the fun of it, anyone in our global audience who's listening today to Angelina's incredible gift, this gift of our conversation, I hope it's a gift. If you want to go and see how important that is to the Rockefellers, if you go to Rockefeller Center in New York City, Fifth Avenue and 49th and 50th and 51st Street, and you walk from Saks Avenue, Fifth Avenue, the big fancy store on this side of the street, across Fifth Avenue, you come to a beautiful allée, as it's called in architecture, which is a walkway that slopes down toward a skating pond. Lots and lots of people in the world have done that. They've walked down that walk to look at the skating park. Well, just before you get to the skating pond, you will see a big bronze book open like this. And on it is Rockefeller Jr.'s credo and says exactly what I just said a little earlier, including his intention in building Rockefeller Center to give jobs to people in the middle of the Depression. There is liberation of energy, yes?
Yes,
There is adding cumulative energy to that family.
because he allowed then, in terms of the real world behavior and the mindset, he allowed the dream to flourish for his son.
And then
And self,
Rockefeller Jr., in turn, for his daughter and five sons, could say, please follow the same path. What is your aspiration? What adspirato? This is in English, to Latin. What is your breath spiritually leading to? What is your aspiration? And each of them had an aspiration and followed that aspiration, were inspired by it, perspired a lot, and brought incredible things in the third generation into the world, and very different things. Energy has to be let free.
yeah,
It's got to grow.
yes, and dreams nurtured. I think you referred to how important self-actualization is,
Yes,
especially if
yes.
there is a child that grows up in the expectations of their parents, and if they can't become who it is that they need to be, and then you get mad at them as the adult offspring for not getting it right. Yeah, they need instead the encouragement and permission to fly.
Yeah. And if we took Freud for the moment, let's take Mr. Freud because I think it's also interesting for our audience. When Freud was as an old man and he was summing up his life, he was asked, do you have something you'd like to say to posterity about how human beings thrive or don't? And so Freud, in psychospeech, said that the most adjusted people, we can use happy, put happy instead of adjusted, that in his practice and that he saw in his life had done two things well. They had learned to love, that's very interesting, learned to love, and they had learned to work, by which he meant avocation, vocation, and not labor. What were they called to do? How did they learn? And then he said, Angelina, something that every one of our listeners will accept. He said the two great interferers in adjustment are sex, including gender, and money, And he said, money is the most difficult because no nice person will speak of it. What nobody knew today when they signed onto your podcast or the earlier podcast or the later podcasts is you have liberated the subject of money that Freud said is the greatest impediment to adjustment and happiness. You have done something extraordinary, my new friend, by liberating a conversation about money as if it's normal. It isn't normal.
Well, let's make it normal.
Yes, let's make it normal. Yes, let's make it normal. And by the way, as fertilizer for growing your four qualitative capitals, let's get money right, not as the leader, the follower. Let's get money where it belongs, doing something, growing something. And what's growing is your family's spiritual, social, intellectual, and human capital. It's qualitative balance sheet. That's the key to this whole conversation.
Yeah, I think what's so amazing about that is that it's countercultural. So it is kind of a new idea when you talked about scarcity since World War II.
Well, yes and no. It is countercultural. It just happens to be true.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting. If somebody can lead from their values and the other forms of capital, they're better for it, but they have to
Yes,
jump off the diving board and trust.
yes,
Yeah,
yes, yes. You
to
have to
grow.
take your chance.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, you can let Mother Nature's rules win of entropy.
Hmm.
You can let things go and follow the normal course. And by the way, the universe is happy because it's energy again. That's what seems to be the path. This is a counter to energy. This is a counter to physics path, but it's not counter to physics because again, eventually you're going to get back to energy, but you have free will. I'm going to say it a third time as to when. You get to choose when you go back to energy.
Yeah, I hope that the listeners will trust themselves more to take the dive to develop the other parts of themselves.
That is the key. Do what you actually naturally want to do, as Freud said, learn to love and learn to work and deal with sex and gender and money. It's a good path. It's a useful path. He was a very thoughtful man.
Yeah, well, there's a leadership development piece in there because it's very easy to worship money.
Well, let's say there's also a very complicated problem between the first generation, as we refer to it, that who take energy and made it matter, and the second generation's basic reasons for being. And here's something we haven't talked about, but I'll add it. Something will maybe shock most of our listeners. Family begins in the second generation, not the first. Family begins in the second generation, not the first. That's my sum up of 57 years of experience. Now, what do I mean by that? Yes, the first generation is the Genesis generation. Two people. By the way, a family can't be a single person, right? It has to be
Mhm.
two people. That's the
Mhm.
definition. So, two people form a family. And in that process, by and large, the great question of that is the development of energy to matter by the person creating the non normal act. They create a financial fortune. That's the non normal act. By the way, in many of those families, and not a subject for today, but for another day, the business becomes the eldest child in that family. That happens all the time, all over the world.
Of
Let's
course,
be
yes.
very, very clear that the business is the eldest child and almost always a son.
Hmm.
Now, how do you individuate and differentiate as a child in that family when the competition isn't your physical uh, siblings, it's a business? Wow, is that complicated? But let's just follow what Jay said. Family begins in the second generation. Why do I say that? Well, because it's the second generation that has to learn to make joint decisions, social capital. And it has to develop a system of joint decision making because the practice of the 100 years, Angelina, to get to 100 years and get to 200 years, the practice lies in joint decision making. That's governance, by the way, not boxes and constitutions and things. No, It's making joint decisions. Of course it is. It's thousands of joint decisions over all that period of time. So people have to decide to join a joint decision-making system, which means giving up freedom to gain freedom. That's another
Mm,
area we could explore in another time or today, but you have to give up freedom to gain freedom to actually be in a joint decision-making system. Of course you do. But that first generation isn't in a joint decision-making system. Yes, there's a father and a mother, but it tends to be very vertical, not horizontal. Tends to be about developing that energy to matter, which is not a normal thing for him. It's all fine. But now the second generation receives the meteors from that action, that creative action, and it has to make joint decisions about them, or the family's gone.
mhm.
So the art of governance of a family is joint decision making. Of course it is. Um, I'm going to add here, at the risk of taking a few more minutes, I want
Please.
to come back to storytelling and to your comment about your father and your mother and their generations. Um, and you used the word compact. So I want to come back to that because I think at this point in the conversation, thinking about joint decision making, thinking about the second generation as the key generation for long-term family, that's my view. Why do I want us to stop on storytelling, the word compact, and this question of second generation? For the world that's listening, I'm going to tell an American story, but I can also tell you that you somewhere in your historic nation, you have a similar story. What are compacts? Well, first, they're not constitutions and they're not charters. I'm not going to get into that today, but they're not constitutions and they're not charters. They're compacts. Hmm. What does the word compact mean? It means two or more people agree to do something together. The great Genesis story of compact in America occurred in 1620 when a group of religious fundamentalists, I bet including your father's ancestors, including some of mine, by the way, um, a group of religious fundamentalists had left England trying to get to this new world, which had started in Virginia. They tried to get to Virginia, we think, but they didn't get there. It was getting late in the year, and they ended up in New England. And so, what does it have to do with compact and family? Ah, well, here's what it has to do. So, the captain of their ship, Mr. Jones, a Welshman, said, look, we can't go any further. It's late in the season. We have to stop. We have to get you off this ship and onto land so you can get through the winter. So he drops his hook, and these people have been on this boat for months. They stink. They're exhausted. Their people have died. Babies have been born. It's a community. So everybody wants to get off the ship. Of course they do, right? But they don't. They don't because they have a purpose. Create a community to serve God. So what do they do? A group of the men, some of the men, get in a little boat and they go into shore and look around. And what do they find? They find there's fresh water. They find there's some empty fields. Now, not for a good reason, because the Native Americans had died the year before, but there were open fields to grow things and make houses and wood to make houses. So they came back to the ship. And what'd you do? What'd you find? Can we get off the ship? Is this our place? And what they said, yes, we think we can live here. We can create a community for our community, but we can't get off the ship yet. We have to decide how we will make joint decisions when we get on the land. And so they created the Mayflower Compact, one of the most famous human compacts made by a group of religious fundamentalists on a boat wanting to go to the land, but they didn't go to the land. They paused and they wrote the compact. And then they went and made their community and they survived. Terrible winters, terrible issues, but they had a common purpose as a human community to survive. That's a great story for elders to tell. How did they do it? This is how they did it. So compacts are how we decide together to make the journey. That's a document I love reading. I don't like constitutions, too many rules and too many pages. And I don't like charters because it sounds like a corporation coming to life. No, I like compact because it sounds like two or more human beings making a deal on how they'll govern themselves. Isn't that a wonderful story of a family creating a community and then from there thriving?
Yeah, that is wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for providing that sample story because sometimes people don't know where to start. Again,
Yeah,
this is new.
yes. And I want to say a third or fourth time, governance is joint decision making. And the purpose of your joint decision making is to add incrementally energy in each decision you make to balance that which you will naturally lose, plus a little, just like compound interest. And when people say, well, Mr. Hughes, how do I measure the quality, not quantity, of my joint decision? Right back to the question, does this decision tend to enhance the lives of the people who will be governed by that decision or not? Not does it add to my financial capital? No. Does it add to my qualitative capital? Which means if I make it, does it, as far as I can know consciously, tend to enhance the lives of the people about whom this decision is made and who will have to live in the consequence of that decision?
Yeah.
That's the way it works,
Yeah,
or
that's
doesn't.
brilliant. Yeah, thank you. Before I go on to the next question, I wanted to circle back regarding the meteor for a moment.
Yes.
Just because if I think one of the things you had raised in our preamble is anyone that's going to receive an inheritance or any type of gift, a part of it is thinking about what will be the impact on that recipient. And with half of America single, and I don't know
Mhm.
about the statistics for the rest of the world, but I also think about the point that you made that it's even more it needs to be it needs to include even more awareness if you don't know the recipients. And I can think about somebody like Mackenzie Scott that gave away
Yeah.
a
Hmm.
tremendous amount to uh, various beneficiaries.
Hmm.
And I wondered if you would speak about the meteor has who does it have more to do with, and what does one need to think about? Because especially if we're talking about 110 trillion,
Right.
would you speak about the
Okay.
meteor for a moment?
Um, in a book I wrote called The Cycle of the Gift with Keith Whitaker and Susan Masenzio, we wrote this book because we wanted to bring to readers the history of the question that has existed throughout human literal history, that is written history. What is the difference between a transfer and a gift? Sound like the same, they're not. What's the difference between transfer and gift? Well, if we make that distinction for the moment, I will simply say that a gift, historically, by the greatest minds that have put their minds to it, have said it's a magnificent act of magnanimity, big heartedness. It doesn't have things attached to it. It's an act of I love you, I act towards you. That's a gift. Everything else is a transfer. So any reins I put on it, any obligations or duties I put on that action is a transfer. Okay. Gifts tend to liberate, transfers tend to reduce the quality of the life of the recipient. Now, what do we mean by meteor? Well, this was a gift to me by my spirit guides many years ago to realize that for the recipient, this action of another person on them is both involuntary, they have nothing to sign up for, just happens. Stuart Little, the sky falls on them, actually does. So, Stuart Little. And they now have to integrate something that has nothing to do with them at all. Nothing. Just think for a moment. A gift or a transfer, as it's received, has nothing to do with the recipient. It had to do with an action someone else took on them, right?
Hmm.
Right. Somebody else acted on them. So they have an integration problem. By the way, not a financial intermediation problem from the giver's bank account or the transfer's bank account to the recipient's bank account. That's assets under management. That's a false wealth management firm that's really financial capital business. That's fine. That has to happen in capitalism. The problem for the recipient is an integration problem. It's a social problem. It's a human problem. They have to integrate into their lives an action that was involuntary, that is, they didn't sign up for. They will do it, have to integrate probably for the rest of their lives, not for 10 minutes. So the great question of the meteor is, what did you put in it? Oh, did I make a gift or a transfer? What did I put in the meteor? Well, the world says you put money in it. No, you didn't. You put something like money. But what you actually put it is yourself. You put yourself in that meteor and your relationship with that person in that meteor. Whoa, I never thought of that. Yes, but that's what happened. That's what you did. So you may well consider the question, hmm, if I make this gift or transfer and the person has to integrate it, I never had that experience. I have no idea how to do that. That would be a very good place to start. And then ask oneself, well, if I have to integrate it, how would it feel? Oh, that's a really good question. Yes, I think that would be a very thoughtful place to start before you act on someone for whom it's going to be involuntary. The sky fell. They have a lifetime integration. Now, to give you a little flavor of the integration problem, I'm going to give you some behaviors. Hmm. Well, the first behavior of integration that fails is I fight with it, just like PTSD,
Mm.
which means I try to spend it, try to get rid of it. What's the second behavior? I try to give it away. Oh, isn't that a good thing? Not if I'm fleeing from it. What's happened to me? By the way, there are a lot of gifts being given in the world today by people who got meteors who aren't making gifts, they're making transfers running away from the action. Of course, they're get rid of it. It's out of my system. The third is even worse. It freezes you for the rest of your life. Whatever you were going to be and do, it's done. You get frozen by the integration problem. Oh my goodness. So what's the answer? The answer is, can the person integrate it so that the flow of their lives, flow, that wonderful energetic flow of who you are, after a pause, always a good pause, to acknowledge something happened to you. What information do I need to live with this now in my life system for the rest of my life? And then how do I flow with it? Oh, that's the secret of a gift. That I know before I act on you what the issues are of integration. Now, if we come all the way back to $110 trillion, moving all over the world, and as we were saying at the beginning about China and India, and South Korea, your background, half the world's GNP, none of those four countries have any modern history of gifts and transfers. None. All the people are still alive who created the abundance in their 90s and 80s, because that's how it worked in all those societies. Well, what's going to happen to those people who have to integrate these meteors? They're coming. They're very close now because of the ages of the people that are going to be sending the meteors. Is anybody caring about the person who's going to receive rather than just money to money, one account to another? Who cares about the potential suffering in the right sense of suffering? That is illusion or ignorance, so, not pain, suffering as ignorance or illusion. Are we caring, Angelina, about that person? And all those millions of persons who were about to receive these meteors, yes, we are caring about them in the same way as we're caring about American and British and Canadian families that have been dealing with these questions for 120 or 200 years in the Industrial Revolution. But we have to start taking the knowledge of what we've learned for the families in the Industrial Revolution and the tech revolution and the life sciences about gifts and transfers, and asking ourselves, how are these new families that are going in the second generation going to receive their meteors? That's a very important question for this planet.
And I will plug the importance of advisors and coaches that understand this conversation, as well as the importance of family meetings to have those joint decision making so people don't have to be an island or have PTSD, which I think is what you were referring to regarding the fight, flight, freeze.
Yes,
And like I think you had said in a prior podcast that about 80% of people are frozen. They live in nice houses, but they
nice
have
houses, nice children, nice spouses, nice cars, nothing going on.
because somebody and I know I've brought this up in prior conversations, and it's just a metaphor. It's very hard to go down to the local coffee shop or Starbucks and who do you talk to about this? And the smaller your world becomes and the more pressure on your shoulders, the
Mhm.
less likely one might become or be willing to be vulnerable, but hopefully the right people will come into their lives regarding grace.
And let's again remember how difficult this is. This is Freud. Remember, money is the most difficult because no
Mm,
nice person will speak of it, just as you just said.
mm,
So, how do I gain not just the courage? First, I need the confidence. Then I
mm,
need the courage. How do I gain the confidence to have this discussion? I must be conscious profoundly that these are very, very important issues in my life. So, first, I must be conscious. Then I can see, do I have the confidence to ask? And then do I have the courage to act? Of course, that's how all complex issues are dealt with, right? First, I have to wake up. Second, I have to have the confidence that what I woke up to is real. And third, the confidence to act. That's the way it works. So at the very beginning of our conversation today, I asked everybody listening, will you come with me on a consciousness raising? Will you come with me that wealth means well-being, not
mm.
financial capital?
Yeah.
Because if that consciousness isn't present, Mother Nature wins.
Ooh.
If the consciousness is present, you get to the question of confidence and courage.
Yeah.
Are you ready for a journey? Are you ready to grow your qualitative selves, supported by your quantitative self? Are you
Yeah.
willing? Are you willing to get to the free will question of how long your family lasts? Are you willing to do those things? If you're not willing to do those, it's okay. It's just entropy wins.
Yeah. Oh, there's a hero's journey with Joseph Campbell right there.
You bet that this is the hero's journey. And back to something else again, you said, if the statistics are anywhere near right, that 70% of these meteors will come into the hands of women, shouldn't we be asking the women who are listening, how are you feeling about this consciousness? Yes, in fact, I think it is the yin consciousness of yin yang that your family shall thrive. There you have an advantage with respect to the men's yang energy. Then will you use that yin energy, that belief that you can have a family that will last 5 generations and more? With that confidence of that yin energy, will you then have the courage to do that which is necessary, which is integrate money into your life successfully? That's the proposition.
Yeah, kudos. Thank you for speaking into that. So let me bring up one of the remedies, which they call the soft side: culture, communication, and shared values. How can emotional and relational intelligence be a family's foundation regarding their legacy?
Well, I'll say at this stage of our conversation that I have spent most of this lifetime trying to get rid of the word soft,
Along with next gen, but keep going, please.
the rising gen.
Yeah, that's your preference. Yeah, because nobody
Oh,
wants to be next.
no one wants to be next.
Yeah.
So if we take rising gen and we take, for the word soft, we replace it with qualitative,
Mm.
then here's the amazing thing that happens, Angelina. That which appeared hard, the financial capital issues, become quantitative. Now, in this conversation that we've been engaged in today, we all know that the qualitative issues are the only ones that matter. You have to do well with your financial, which is going to grow it properly, be a good steward. But all its purposes is to grow the qualitative. So there's no soft. The qualitative growths are really hard, much more difficult relationships, consciousness than managing financial capital, much more difficult. Of course they are. So the soft issue disappears. It's actually much harder. This is much harder. My hand gesture to
Hmm.
do much harder. So if we can accept that the qualitative issues are where the energy in the family must be growing, that is, we must be purposeful together spiritually, have an aspiration to have a fifth generation. We have to be making hundreds of decisions jointly. That means giving up some of our freedom to make decisions with another person. That's hard. Intellectual count. Are we learning all the time and sharing what we learn? I mean, are we really learning? That's hard. And are we thriving human beings? Are we eating right? Are we taking our medicines properly? Are we exercising? Are we growing? That's hard. These are hard. This is not so hard. The financial capital with my thumb sticking down in the earth is not so hard. There are wonderful people to help us with that. The question is, are they aligned with our purpose? That their work on financial capital and our work is to grow our qualitative capitals. That's the advisor our families are looking for. Not that people are, and they are very good people who understand how to learn to grow financial capital so it dynamically regenerates the qualitative capitals. They know how to do that because they're as purposeful as you are about growing their families. There's, I'll say something now because again, people may want to read books. One of the greatest books ever written on this question, 40 pages, takes half an hour to read, written in the 1940s. And the title of the book is Where Are All the Customers' Yachts? I won't say any more, but I would say reading that book for half an hour illustrates everything I'm saying today about how you choose an advisor.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think the culture matters. The communications matter. The investment into all of that matters compared to
Yes,
thinking people are just going to know and then getting punished when they don't know.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And the tragedy, well, it's a tragedy if the advisor you choose is only interested in financial capital intermediation, then I dare say they can't help you unless you have another advisor who leads the process, who is the person de confiance that I wrote about in my books. That is the person who wants to be on the journey with you to help you grow your qualitative selves.
Yeah.
Then the person helping with the quantitative is in the right order.
Very good. Very good. Let me weave it back to storytelling for a moment. What insights regarding purpose or meaning can that family narrative play regarding shaping a durable legacy?
Well, as
I,
I
I
said
know
earlier,
I know you mentioned about the social compact, and I'm circling back and I'm
on
circling the
purpose.
wagons a little bit because this could be the first time someone hears this conversation because their parents didn't talk about it at the kitchen table or dining room
Right.
table.
Okay. Well, the first thing is that peer to peer is how we learn best, always. So if you don't have any experience of these questions, because it wasn't in your family, and you are willing to start with a beginner's mind.
Mm.
What did I just say?
A
Are you
beginner's
willing
mind.
to start with a beginner's mind? Hmm. That's a huge consciousness raise, isn't it? I just did. How often do we ever start any question with a beginner's mind rather than the mind that we have that was already made up and we're just trying to prove something? My goodness, that is a huge gift to a family. If you can have a beginner's mind about what is in fact a beginner's issue that you have, as Angelina just outlined it. Well, of course, then the useful thing is to find peers who have dealt with this question, who have a history with this question, not just advisors, no, peers. Get into communities where there are peers, and there are loads of wonderful organizations. By the way, I'm not going to name them, because all of them have a financial component associated with the use of the people who facilitate. That's over to you to find, but Angelina can give you a list of them in 10 minutes if you want. Let her do it. I won't. But the point is, those peer-to-peer organizations are actually very effective because they put you in small groups with people with your issues. And you listen to your peers about how they're dealing with them. Oh my goodness, that would be such a relief, you say. What a relief it would be for me to sit in a room with people that can talk about money and integrating money and their children's well-being. Oh, I love that. How do I get there? Okay, Angelina will help you get there. But the point is, that's where you start. Now, they have advisors who are the person de confiance that I mentioned because they're further up the learning curve. That does not mean they don't have advisors who are interested person of affairs in financial intermediation. But that isn't, but they actually also have and work very hard to find advisors that are interested in helping them grow their qualitative selves. Surprise, surprise. Because
Yes.
they want to have free will as how it comes out.
Yeah. I will have to have you back on again because I realize I've only worked through half of the questions, but I want to get to the part where legacy is personal.
Yes.
And I'm curious, what does legacy mean to you? Because there is, when you spoke about words before and definitions, the etymology of the word legacy was originally they were a messenger in
I think,
historic times, the
yes.
word.
Well, Angelina, there is a statement that seems trite to people that we are no more than our teachers. It's the wisest thing ever said. We are no more than our teachers. So I don't like the word legacy because it's a word that lawyers use for about a gift and a will. I like the word lineage,
Mm,
line. Where do we come from? And where is that line extending? So when you ask me that question, I look at lineage and I ask, standing on the shoulders of my teachers, who are some as old as last week and some as old as Aristotle and Plato, and some as old as Confucius and Lao Tzu in the East. The teachers are always present with the great ideas. Great ideas are timeless, aren't they? They're timeless. They are teach us how to be human, how do human communities work. So lineage for me has in this lifetime been extending, again, sixth generation lawyer. By the way, my son-in-law is the seventh and my granddaughter's the eighth. And remember, my father said the purpose of law is to create a safe, orderly place for people to wake up in. Oh, that's what we do. So lineage is hugely important to me, standing on the shoulders of my teachers. So what would I share as my lineage? I would share as my lineage that my goal is that no solitary spirit on the earth is suffering because it does not know what my teachers taught me.
mm. That's a profound answer. Thank you. Thank you for your wisdom. Um, In one sentence, what would you like your legacy to be or your lineage to be? Is it to create that orderly society that allows people to wake up safe?
Yes, it is that we use modern communications, which is a gift that no human being ever had before. Use them wisely to share the greatest ideas that we have in our libraries about how to be human, how to create a family, how a family thrives, how it flourishes, and then how, if it flourishes, it creates a flourishing society. Aristotle, in our Western tradition, in around 350 BC, wrote a book called The Politics that underlies all governance systems on the planet ever since. He's just been rewriting his book. And he said the building blocks of a flourishing society are flourishing families and vice versa.
Hmm.
And by the way, he's right. Why do we still read his book? And what are we at risk of? An old man now. We are at risk that we have enabled families not to flourish by having their view of themselves be their financial selves.
Ooh,
This
right.
is a terrible problem. Of course, it has nothing to do with your family flourishing. It supports its flourishing, but as we've been discussing this wonderful morning, it's not the answer. So you want a flourishing family, you must grow your qualitative self, as we've learned today. And that's not Jay Hughes, that's the wisdom of my elders, all these centuries of all the great ideas about how you live a human life, you create a family. And then does that family lead to a flourishing society?
Yes. Is there a good website if the listeners would like to learn more about your work?
I'm sorry?
Is there a good website if the listeners would learn to like to learn more about your work? And then you'll have to come back on for the second half of the questions
Well, um,
one day.
some years ago, a group of remarkable people, totally unknown to me, decided to create a foundation in my name, the James E. Hughes Jr. Foundation. They announced this to me about 3 years ago, and I was completely shocked, totally surprised, and frankly, immediately wanted to say I'm not worthy. And they said, you can't say that. And you can't take your name off of it, which of course is a wasp I wanted to do. So I would say, in honoring the donors who made the decision to create that foundation, if the people that are listening to us and watching us want to know more about this, they can go on the foundation's site, which is www.jehjf.org, jeusfoundation.org, and they can find there, I hope, some distillation, some synthesis of my teachers. Very little of Jay.
That's very humble. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Namaste.
Namaste. I want to, before I read my closing paragraph, I'd like to take a moment, not just to thank you for your time, but we had started out today's podcast episode, our conversation today, with the intention of what if one person could suffer less in the integration of their meteor, and that meteor being the distinction you made between gifts and transfers and understanding that when anytime anyone gives something to someone, it is a meteor in their life. Will it stop their growth? Will it enhance their growth? And I think these are the emotional intelligence capacities that we need to value and think about because we do live in a society that values money. Almost money becomes this false idol of who has more. And gosh darn it, if you don't have the latest Porsche Cayenne, then perhaps one might be less in the comparison of a different set of metrics depending on where somebody lives in that their world, their culture, and so forth. And I think sometimes people don't know how to order their lives. They don't know where to start regarding putting these things in order. And with 2/3 of today's affluent being self-made, they really don't know because they ran to the middle of the football field and they finally made it to the middle of the football field and then they don't know what game showed up and they're in the middle. And like you had spoke about physics, woo, that football's flying fast regarding the quarterbacks around them. So I really appreciate you being here today and speaking about all of these very important topics.
It was my joy to be with you, and thank you for inviting me.
In closing, I'm Angelina Carleton, the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast, as well as the founder of Legacy Planning, a boutique advisory firm based out of Beverly Hills, California, USA, but international in those I coach and consult. I hope to dive deep into subjects that can help a person define, develop, and execute their legacy, and continue to scour the landscape for those who can be great resources to every dimension of your legacy. For many listeners, there can never be enough education and preparation in the moat around your castle. Whether you find yourself with new wealth or generational wealth, may the content on this channel be an anchor in any storms ahead. We do our best to provide original content for your intellectual and emotional curiosity. If you're tuning in today on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, etc., please remember to rate and review, share with your family and friends. And if you feel so inclined, reach out to either Mr. Hughes or myself with an email and let us know your thoughts and feelings about today's conversation. So thank you so much for joining, and thank you, Jay, for speaking into your
Thank
legacy.
you. Thank you.